Hey everyone, welcome to our studio at Techtown. On this edition of Your Daily Detroit, something fun. To my left, Norris Howard, the Prince of Brightmoor. How are you?
Hey man, it's always great to be here in the Daily Detroit studios. We have a very special guest in here with us today. I'm so excited about this.
I'm glad you think they're special because for me, it's part of a secret plot to finally even the balances of this show. As I am an East Sider, often I am outnumbered, but to my right, just to the side of me, is none other than Mr. Orlando Bailey. How are you?
We are the majority today, Jer. We are
Pass
the
all the bills.
majority.
Next 20 minutes.
East Side, born and raised. We are the majority today, and I dare somebody to write and say something about it. Because what we like to do on the East Side is meet you outside too.
I'll let it stand for this week. For this show, I will let it stand. But listen,
Experience being in the minority party.
Mr. Friday back on here, and let's even the odds back up.
He'll let
West
it
side,
stand
the
as
best
if he
side.
had a choice. It's all good.
Orlando is, I don't know what the proper term is, but I think of you as the head honcho of Outlier Media.
Yeah, that would be correct.
Co-host of the Authentically Detroit podcast.
Yes, that would be correct.
And I would say like community organizer, activist, and all around, I would say got your hands in a lot of the good things happening in Detroit.
All of the things, and I'm glad that you said the good things in the city of Detroit. I appreciate that. Yeah, man, first and foremost, I describe myself as a son of Detroit, right? I am a son of Detroit. I love this city. I feel like the city loves me sometimes, right? Because, those of us that are in relationship with this city don't always feel like it loves us back all the time. But, we are, in a happy domestic violent situation. Codependent, domestically violent situation here in the city of Detroit. And so I am all of the things that you mentioned. I began my career in community development, doing community organizing and activism and advocacy. And so through and through, I am an organizer with the lens of my grandmother being a gatherer of community and being the mother of community. And I have that same gift. I love bringing people together, although every time I try to bring people together, I think people don't come. I'm like, is somebody coming? I don't think anybody's coming. And then people come and then I sigh of relief. But also a storyteller, a journalist, and I have the opportunity and have had the opportunity to work with some of the best journalists and reporters in the city at Bridge Detroit now as the head of Outlier Media. It is a privilege to come into Techtown every day.
So what drew you to Outlier? You're a person who has a lot of opportunities. You could do a lot of things.
Yes.
Why Outlier?
Well, so I to answer that question, I have to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about Bridge Detroit. Bridge Detroit was started in 2020. And Bridge Detroit borrowed its model, its responsive model from that of Outlier Media. Outlier didn't have a fully functioning editorial side just yet, but Sarah Alvarez and Candace Fortman was at the table that formalized and founded Bridge Detroit. They are founders of Bridge Detroit and loaned that model to them. And so I was able to work there for about 4 years, and then the opportunity to come and be the executive director of Outlier came, and I said, why not go to Big Mama? Because that's what I call Outlier. Outlier is Big Mama, Outlier is Auntie, because literally, I would not have been able to do the amazing work that I was able to do at Bridge Detroit had it not been for the model that Outlier innovated.
And I have so much professional and personal respect for Candace and Sarah. Sarah's been on the show before.
Yes.
We haven't had the opportunity to have Candace on yet. At some point, I know she's doing some things.
She's at she's in JSK at Stanford. She's in Cali.
Moving on up in so many ways.
Moving on up and now. I'm like, Candace, are you coming back? She may not. We'll see.
But you know what? But I know she's got to feel great, having her baby in great hands.
Yeah.
Such as yourself. But, I wanted to have you on the show, and me and Jared discussed, wanted to have you on the show. I had this conversation because the city is in a transitional period right now.
Yeah.
You say yourself, as a son of Detroit, I consider myself the same. You on the east.
We brothers.
Myself on the west.
We brothers. It's all love.
It's all love. But the city is about to go through some changes. What changes those are, we don't know. What is sort of let's start with the 30,000 view. We coming in 2025, new president, new mayor, more than likely brand new city council. The landscape of Detroit is about to change.
Yeah.
probably pretty drastically within the next 12 months. What do you foresee as some of the things that are going to be changing, and what do you hope stays the same?
That's a great question. The 30,000-foot view is that I think the amount of federal resources that have been appropriated to Detroit from the legislature in D.C. on down, from the president's offices at HUD or the transportation department, right? Dollars that have flowed to Detroit that are making a material and physical difference in the city of Detroit. Like, some of the dollars, we're able to see a physical difference within our infrastructure, or will be able to see a physical difference. I don't know if the incoming administration has the same kind of appetite for investment in urban cores, and I'm being
That's putting it euphemistically.
Right. I'm being nice there.
Lay on top of that, I was at a panel recently, and they were talking about how Mike Duggan and Joe Biden are actually personal friends, like personal, real friends.
And that's also very well documented that. Mayor Duggan calls the president Joe. Like, they have been friends for a long time. In fact, when Joe Biden was elected in 2020, there was a large amount of speculation that the mayor had to sort of feign off by saying, I am not going to work for Joe Biden, because I know I was asking him that question, back in 2020. He was a visible delegate for President Biden. And so I think the national appetite for investment may look different, and it may change. And that will also result in a material and physical difference on the pavements of Detroit neighborhoods, right? The other piece, too, is that the legislature in Michigan is going to be different, right? Right now, the Democrats have a trifecta in the Michigan, in Lansing. Is that going to continue, right? We don't know.
We don't know.
we don't know what's going to happen. And, the budgets, I think Democrats were able to get through at least 2 budgets with the trifecta.
Yeah, and I think they lost the House, I want to believe, still have the Senate.
Yeah. They lost the House. So with an insane amount of investment, like investments that we have not yet seen, a lot of that was due to the ARPA money coming to the state, but all of that's going to change and look differently. And I would just say, from a regional and even municipal perspective, a new mayor and a new city council, things are in the air. We don't know. I think that Mayor Duggan, having worked in the city, but also the region, I think he had the relationship and the acumen to release what I would call a decades-long economic embargo on Detroit, on part of the region, in the state, right? Folks were comfortable bringing money here. Folks were comfortable bringing investment here after a long time of disinvestment, after a long time of disinterest. Will that continue, right? We have to still report our financials to a financial review commission, right? To make sure that we can make sure that we're still in the clear from bankruptcy, and all of that. How is anybody coming after this mayor going to fare, right? In terms of political capital and confidence? More than likely, the person coming after Duggan will be Black. How does that look? What does that look like? Right.
I think it's a huge point that I think a lot of not just the media, but a lot of just folks in this discourse, the conversation about the future of Detroit and this legislature, haven't really discussed at all. Yeah. Is that there is a very, very strong chance the next mayor will be Black. There is I will go out on a limb and say a 50% chance that it could be a Black woman. Don't quote me. I'm just saying, I think it's a high chance.
Well, a number of the candidates are. I'm not naming names, but they just are.
I think it's a high chance. How does that change the dynamic of those relationships that Orlando was talking about? And I think it's going to be really important to see how that jives, particularly in the sort of public-private corporate sponsorship philanthropy area. In Orlando, way more about that than even I would. But as we look at what's happened over the past decade in the city of Detroit, there's a lot of that sort of corporate public-private collaboration. And without those federal dollars, how then does the business community step up? Do they see it as an opportunity to exert more influence? Do they see it as an opportunity to sort of scale back That's going to be something that's going to be really interesting to see in the city of Detroit.
One of the things that we have to wrestle with as well is that, yes, there's been progress economically, but there's still so much more to go.
Absolutely.
Hard facts.
And there's so much more investment that needs to happen.
Absolutely.
And I don't even just apply it from a capitalistic point of view, but an infrastructure point of view.
Absolutely.
I mean, like a third of
the
our
folks
buses
in
don't work right now.
The buses, I was talking to young people yesterday. So Authentically Detroit, we meet with young people once a month, every month. And so I was asked, they take DDOT. And they're like, depending on the day, sometimes it just may not show up, right?
And it's been that way.
Yeah, and I think the stat right now is 75%.
I only can take the bus because I follow it on the app because there's so many ghost buses. Unless I see the bus being tracked, I don't count it's going to happen.
That kind of like service infrastructure, right? That the city can, I think that's been Duggan's kryptonite. I think he has said that he really just doesn't know how to fix the Department of Transportation. And I know that's eking away at him because he is a fixer, right? He hasn't figured out how to fix that. But also, blue, green, hard infrastructure. If you talk to folks in Jefferson Chalmers, those sea levels are continuing to rise. And there has been no talk around hard dollar investment in erecting a seawall over there or figuring out how to free up some dollars by getting rid of the floodplain over there so that investment can come. So right now there seems to be an embargo on certain parts of the neighborhood because of the floodplain designation. That Grosse Pointe Park was able to get out of because of their advocacy. Detroiters, on the other hand, got stuck with it.
And Detroiters don't necessarily agree on the solutions over there.
Yeah.
Like in the articles I've read, there's a lot of,
lot.
and you've got to have a leader that's able to go in there and get people to figure out a solution because nature's going to win.
Yeah.
Like you can say,
I would say an organizer.
yes,
I
there you go.
don't think we need. I think activism right now is moving away from the one charismatic leader. Right, I think those people come ever so often. I don't think we make those.
Really,
I do.
You really think so? I mean, it's considering who just won the White House, a charismatic leader with objectively none of his own ideas, right? Who is just able to brand himself and project himself as a strong man. There's been a lot of conjecture on the left and in the city also saying that progressives and liberals and those types of folks need the sort of equivalency of that, but you feel like it's moving even further away from that.
Well, we thought we had an equivalent. We thought we had an equivalency, right? I think society thought that Joe Biden was the equivalency at one point. Society thought that Kamala Harris was the equivalency at one point, and we see how that is not working. And so white supremacy, and I'll be very frank because Donald Trump espouses and sympathizes with a lot of white supremacist ideals, sympathizes with those hate and terrorism groups. White supremacy always has cover. White supremacy always has leaders. What I'm talking about in charismatic leadership that comes around every once in a while, we only get a Martin Luther King once in a generation, right? Or a Malcolm X, or three. We only get a Barack Obama for a certain era, right? I don't think it's about the charismatic leader. I think it's about figuring out how to organize and build power on the ground. And then from that power, you put forth whoever you want to because you know what you want. You're organized around what your need is. You're organized around what your want is. And then you choose the leader who acquiesces to that. We don't try. I think we've been doing it backwards as organizers. I'm putting on my organizer hat now. I think we've been doing it backwards. I think we figure out the person that we want, like who is the person, like who can win. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try to convince them about all of our issues and all of our stances to do something about it. Instead of gathering people, submitting to the power of that people, I don't think we can ever over-index engagement in community, right? And from there, you pick the leader.
Yeah. And I want to hop in because I love that. Because I think where we are right now, particularly looking at it from the national and the state level, is that the the local organization is going to become even more impactful than it was even before. You don't have a lot of states that are going to get virtually no cooperation from the federal government. So what does that mean? That means there's going to be a lot of people on the ground in cities and states across the country that are doing exactly that will have no choice but to do exactly that. And I think the more you have folks who have that understanding and realize that they're not going to get a lot of cooperation from the system as a whole, then that becomes significantly more possible than I think what the situation allowed for previously.
I was mentioning off air that my great aunt was one of the leading female organizers in the UAW and rose to the vice presidency. And one of the things she taught me is that kind of work you're talking about is a lot of work. Oh, yeah, it's a lot of organization. It's real hard. And my fear is in a social media age where there's a lot of emojis and comments. How does that turn into a united policy platform? Because in order to get something, you have to unite on what to ask for. And I feel like in some ways, social media splits us up where we're all asking for different things, when if we could come up with a series of things that we are going to ask for, it's going to be a lot better chance that we're going to get them or organize for or push for.
I think we can do hard things because we have done hard things before. And I think, because I'm from the streets, right? I'm from the streets of Detroit. I'm from the east side. I'm still in these streets, right? I love going out. I love walking neighborhoods. I love canvassing. And let me tell you who I see outside doing hard things, right? Taking care of their neighborhood, taking care of the vacant lot that the city owns because the city isn't taking care of it. I see Detroiters doing that every single day. And some of these social media personalities and activists, if I asked them if they know who they are, they wouldn't be able to tell you. And so I think we have to differentiate what's happening in the digitized footprint, ether, in that zeitgeist, and whether or not if it's real or if it's not, and what is happening in the streets. People in the streets, people in Detroit leaders are doing hard things every day. And I don't think we could sacrifice the fidelity of relationship, the fidelity of the time it takes to do this quickly. We'll shortchange ourselves in the long run, right? And we go through this every election cycle, right? Where right now folks are trying to organize. Well, we should have been organizing. Democracy is a 365-day, 24/7 day. It is that kind of sport. And I do believe that next year, 2025, we'll see what happens. I do think that there are still people out doing the hard things.
Well, my block club captain does not mess with Instagram.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? She's not going to be on any of those things.
On there.
But everybody's name's in the phone. Everybody's name's in the phone.
That's right.
Well,
and that's so funny. Real quickly, I was having a conversation with a budding journalist here in the city of Detroit who feels pressure to sort of sometimes be brash on Twitter to build a persona or a hot take. And I said to this journalist, allow your work to be your platform. Your work, when you do good work, it'll platform you, and you don't have to work overtime to keep it, right? I barely tweet. My platform is never in jeopardy. You understand what I'm saying? I'm privileged to hold a significant platform in the city of Detroit because of the work. The work has built that. Not my brashness on Instagram or on Twitter, but because of the work that I do on the pavements of neighborhoods, in community with people, that continues to build the platform that I'm able to stand on, right? And so moving away from the polarization, people aren't that polarizing. People are not that polarizing. When you sit down and you talk with them and you have a conversation, folks want to be able to afford their groceries. Folks want to be able to afford rent, right? And folks want a political system in the city of Detroit that is responsive to them.
Flat out. And Jer, to that, and just to double back on that, is that I think we need to sort of get away from not just the social media aspect of it and not just the effects that people aren't as polarized as I think the media makes them out to be. I think ultimately we've seen in our lifetimes people come together on a myriad of issues. What we have to sort of stop and what we have to sort of be on the watch out for is the systems that are made to dismantle said movements. That's what comes in and kneecaps these things. We've seen people organize over women's rights. We've seen people vote on it. We've seen people vote on, gun control. We've seen people vote on financial justice. We've seen people vote on all these issues. People have organized on all of them, and they've gone to the polls for all of them. We just saw an election where nationwide people voted for quote unquote liberal policies and still voted for this dude. So that goes to your point, Orlando, where it's like at the end of the day, people all kind of want the same stuff. What we have to stop is letting interloping voices, which a lot of times come from online, take over those narratives.
Yeah, we stopped talking to each other.
And we stop talking to each other.
We stopped talking to each other. And that can't be.
Yeah.
Right? How can we be in community with one another if we don't talk to each other and hear each other? And I think we have to learn how to productively lean into conflict, because organizing is messy. It's messy work. And I think people think it's supposed to go smoothly. No, this is messy work, and it's an investment, right? Leaning into conflict, allowing people to express their expertise and their trauma, however that shows up. And so what I say about Detroit, that if anybody is going to do work in Detroit politically, if anybody's going to do organizing and advocacy work in the city of Detroit, love is required. Not just for the practice of the thing, not just for the practice of urban planning,
right,
not just for the practice of architecture, but love for the people above the practice in all of our complexity, in all of our nuance, in all of our trauma, and in all of our exuberance, because that's what makes up the city. And if we don't figure out how to hear each other, right, and acknowledge what we're saying, acknowledge the trauma that exists, we're in trouble.
And I think beyond that, just to add on that, I think it also takes a great amount of courage. And what I mean by courage is not the physical courage of like, that neighborhood looks scary. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that courage to be able to look at one's own shortcomings or look at one's own blind spots, which I think, as I said before on the show, was something that allowed a mayor like Mike Duggan to become as effective as he ultimately was, is because there were moments in which, particularly around race, where he admitted shortcomings and he went into certain neighborhoods and he went into certain areas, and that gave him a level of verification amongst certain people that gave him the leeway to be able to do certain things. And I think that when we're talking about love and we're talking about that appreciation, I think you have to have that. No, but let's disagree. Let's lean into the conflict.
No, I might push back on that.
Let's lean in.
Only because if you look at the results of the last mayoral election, Detroiters did not show up.
No, they didn't vote.
You had and if you look at like the electorate map of that election, you had folks come out from highly organized and engaged neighborhoods.
Correct.
Palmer Park.
And higher earning
neighborhoods, right? And so I think that there is a difference in a city like Detroit between the electorate and citizens.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference.
There is.
And I think citizens who may not necessarily always be a part of the electorate will have something to say about what you just said. But
then I will also say, number one, how do we get those citizens to become the electorate and exercise said voices?
I think that's the job of organizers, and I think that's the job of anybody running for elective office. But most politically astute folks who are running for office don't want to do that hard work. They're scared to do that hard work. It's much easier to engage and figure out how to appease a small piece of an electorate than like the entire citizen.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And that electorate will win you office.
But this whole conversation is happening over a backdrop of change, and cities are always changing, but there is a underlying change happening here, not just in the city, but in the region. You talked about Mike Duggan opening up the the economic embargo. In that time, the suburbs have gotten a lot more diverse. You have a lot of people, although you have the smaller win of population growth, those suburbs, man, those are black cities now.
We haven't addressed
and
the
we're
black
not
flight.
and we're not talking about that in context. I mean, you may be, but like the general media is not talking about this in a comprehensive way that matters, because our listeners, and I talk to them, Southfield, Farmington, you name it, Grosse Points. People are going across the region, and that is changing the composition of those cities. It is changing how people feel about each other. It is also changing here in Detroit. You know, you got percentages changing. Yes, there's been some new white folks moved in, but in fact, one of my friends made the point that like a lot of it's dilution.
Yeah.
And there's not that many new white people. It's just there's less black people,
There's
so we
less
show
black
up
people.
better.
Yep.
And so, yes. And, Donna Givens Davison and I, my co-host at Authentically Detroit, and I were screaming this during the redistricting process, right? Because, they were going off of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, right? The VFA, and you had to draw certain. I don't want to we don't have to get deep into it. But what we were trying to get people to understand is that there are black people outside of Detroit. There's a huge black population in Southfield, right? We got black folks in Southfield. We got black folks in Farmington. We got Oak Park. All of these places. And so what we were trying to say is that it may be a mistake on part of the Democrats to draw the lines, and then we found out that it got reversed, and it was to draw the lines of the districts the way that they were, because they were dissected. It was just crazy. And so we have not accounted for the spread and the sprawl of black folk in the region, and what that looks like for cities like Southfield, cities like Ferndale, cities like Farmington, and other spaces outside of Detroit. But we also have not figured out really and I know this number is inaccurate, but we're supposed to have 500,000 people on the voting rolls in the city of Detroit, and we don't even get 20% to turn out for municipal elections, right? There is so much hard work to do. There's so much hard work to do and so much coordination that needs to happen, right? So now that the doors of Oakland County is open, right? Elbrooks-Patterson is not there no more. It's a new day in Oakland County.
Yeah.
What does that coordination look like, right? I don't know about Macomb County. We're still working on Macomb, right? But I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity and excitement. Like, I'm excited that we have the doors open to. I was talking to the deputy Oakland County executive the other week, who was here at Techtown for a meeting talking about Detroit, right? When have we seen that happen in recent decades? And so I think there's a tremendous amount of will. I think that there is a tremendous amount of excitement. I think we can continue to build upon like this coordination. And I think whoever wants to be mayor needs to have not only a legislative policy agenda for city council in the city of Detroit, right? For that, what's your vision, right? What's your policy agenda for the city of Detroit? But you need to have a policy agenda for the region and for Lansing, right? It does not, Duggan understood that there at certain times he had to leverage his political capital in Lansing to get stuff done in the city of Detroit. He understood that. And I want to hear from a candidate who has a legislative policy agenda for Lansing as it relates to the city of Detroit and the region, how you plan to coordinate with the region, because we need it.
And so speaking of that, obviously we're talking from a perspective of elections and redistricting and all that, but how do we then either get some of those folks back? Because I was in the burbs, I'm back. How do we get some of those people back? Because as it stands right now, there is a fear amongst folks in the streets that this city is no longer being their city. The two Detroit's narrative, at least in my observations, conversations with folks around the city, that gap is deepening as time goes on. And so, I want to talk to both of y'all about this and ask both of y'all in the open forum, sort of, how do we begin to mend that? Because what I'm seeing and what I at least try to mitigate, obviously, if you live in the city, it's your city. Go wherever you want, do whatever you do. But it's hard to sort of, it's hard to break through that. And I think as long as we have that sort of narrative dominating what we're seeing in the neighborhoods, it's going to be very difficult to get some of those people back.
I do want to put a pin there and say we have to then wrestle with some hard numbers. And what I mean by that is school attainment, tax rates, safety, because those are the kinds of things when I talk to my neighbors that move out. I remember talking to somebody in Warren who they lived in the city, their family lived in the city, they're multiple generations. Their dad was like, I'm not buying you a house in Detroit because the taxes are too high. You have to pick some place in the suburbs. It's those kinds of things where it's that very straightforward, like, hey, I've got kids to raise, I've got whatever. It has to be competitive in that sort of way. Right now,
it's not.
And it's not.
And it's not.
It's the second highest to New York City, I think.
And prices are continuing to rise. Two things to what you said and to what you're saying. Norris, what you're describing is, I call it a palpable sense of cultural anxiety.
Facts.
And erasure that comes with a tremendous amount of investment in areas, the appreciation of values in neighborhoods that some folks can't keep up with, the unaffordability of being able to stay where you are, if that's taxes or if that is my house is falling apart and I can't afford to fix it up, right? That's a real issue. Right. I talked to a resident in Island View who told me, and I didn't know what she was saying at the time, but she was saying this to me in 2012. She was like, my neighborhood is losing its soul. She's talking about cultural erasure, right? And, investors coming in and not honoring that cultural tapestry in a way that makes her feel comfortable. I think the other thing that we absolutely have to grapple with are those hard numbers. Let's not even talk. Outlier Media has done a series on affording Detroit. And what we have found, number one, the automotive insurance rates, I know because I pay it.
Facts. Same.
Is
crazy,
absolutely astronomical. And the political capital that Duggan expended in Lansing on de-insurance has not produced the reforms that it was promised, right? Detroiters love our museums and our libraries, and we say yes to every millage. The property taxes are high, right? And so when you are thinking about purchasing, right, and you think about the amount of taxes that you're going to have to pay in exchange for maybe great or lackluster city services,
right?
Is it worth it, right? Can I walk to a grocery store in my neighborhood? Can I walk to recreation and parks in my neighborhood? If you're living in Lafayette Park, you can say
okay.
yes,
yeah,
right? But you're paying the cost at premium to be able to say yes to all of those things.
Right.
And what happens, especially for young people, if they move here, get married here, they move out as soon as they have children. As soon as they have children, they move out because
the school situation.
Because of the situation with the schools. And we have to, Mayor Duggan tended to kind of be hands off on the schools, right? I think the next mayor has to come in with a point of view and a plan to figure that out.
Yeah, I think I would agree. That's one of the single biggest issues that I think, we have yet to really address in those open forums is the school issue. Obviously, during emergency management and the redistricting of Detroit public schools and all that stuff, fine. We're to a point now where people got to look at the school physically and say, do I want my kid to go into that building every day? And I think a lot of people who live in Detroit are simply saying, no, I don't.
And are there ways to deliver services and realize we're the city that we are? Because I think a lot of times we think about Detroit still as being over 1 million people, whatever. At some point, and I know it's emotionally difficult to deal with this, we are what we are.
We are what we are.
And so we need to scale to what we are, because
and that's the hard conversation you got to have in neighborhoods. That people that, because if you ask, like, what do we need in our city? Folks are going to say housing. And it's like, well, there isn't a real market for new build single family homes.
It's also extremely
and
expensive
it's
to
also
build.
really expensive. So what about something else? And they were like, well, I remember when there were people everywhere. And it's like,
It's not what's happening.
Well, so I think about my neighborhood, the North End, and I love it. And there's a lot of different views on the North End, but the houses that were there before were owned by very rich people, doctors, lawyers, 5 bedrooms, 3 stories, all these things that people are talking about. Those houses were inhabited by wealthy people. In my particular part of the North End, a lot of Jewish people. By the old Temple Bethel, and there's churches that used to be synagogues on many corners.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize in order to have that grandeur, you had to have a level of wealth because it was the North End, because it was the North End of Detroit. Detroit ended at Highland Park. That's where you lived if you wanted to be out in the, not out in the suburbs, but out away from things a little bit. So we have to think about, it is 2024. How do we enable different kinds of single family housing? Or how do we enable different folks to live there at different price points? Because you can't rebuild. My house was built in 1922.
You're not rebuilding that.
It's impossible.
It's not feasible.
And some of the most successful developments I've seen actually go what's called by right zoning, which is really interesting. You'll see them on the east side where it's like, oh, we're going to build a house that's like a single family or whatever, but it's a much smaller kind of home. These big homes that were in the north, the houses in the North End, in some ways have the same square footage in some cases as what you'd find out by a golf course in Northville.
Yeah, but I think
true.
also
That's
coming,
so true.
And I think also coming along with that, and we talk about it a lot on the show, is the zoning conversation, which is something that I think in many of our neighborhoods, to your point, I think a lot of folks in those neighborhoods are definitely not ready for the zoning conversation. To say, hey, we're gonna put like a 6-story apartment building around the corner. How do you feel about that? And we saw what happened in Royal Oak this summer, where people lost their minds, and people say, "Wait, a new apartment building? We have to preserve what this neighborhood is." It's like, dog, y'all need more taxes.
You do, but also we need to understand that when you add a building with 120 new residents, all of a sudden your entire voting thing changes.
Yeah,
It
You're
changes.
giving up power.
Your infrastructure changes because are you building something that looks like the neighborhood? I hate the new builds that are going up. They're ugly.
All right, we getting into a deep one.
I agree, but the thing is, there's hope. I've been to cities where new builds look good, but they demand them. We need to demand them. We
Yeah.
could set standards,
Yeah.
but we don't do it because we
Jer,
don't have
I
an
don't-
efficient government.
We need to demand them policy wise because I would say that Detroiters on the ground are demanding that and they're not being heard. So there needs to be some sort of policy, some sort of ordinance and zoning. I don't know what needs to happen. Y'all know, but that needs to happen because Detroiters are saying exactly what we're saying on the ground to developers in their neighborhood planning processes, NAC processes that are for neighborhoods that are experiencing developments that's going to trigger the community benefits ordinance. Residents are saying this, but they're not being heard or listened to.
Well, it's part of the reason why there's been no progress on the 375 situation, even to this day, is because they had a plan. Community was like, wait a minute, time out. You didn't talk to us.
Well, they didn't.
They didn't, as I said. The community didn't talk to
I
them.
lived over there. I didn't receive
Nobody did.
anything.
and now they're going and having to go redo the entire process that they should have done the first time.
Yeah.
So it all scans. But I want to shift gears right quick as we close up.
It's
Outlier,
over already?
Outlier, y'all got a thing going on.
Yes. Okay. So Outlier. So listen, y'all. Outlier Media. We understand that it is important to bring you fact-based and relevant information, but we also understand how important it is for Detroiters to be in relationship with their storytellers. And so we want to provide a space for y'all to come and hang out with us. We're having a holiday hustle party. So if you have not learned that line dance, if you've not learned the electric slide yet, if you've not learned the ballroom hustle, or if you've not figured out how to exactly master the Tamiya hustle,
This is
don't
critical.
leave 20 and 24 without learning it. And you can come learn it at the holiday hustle party that Outlier is throwing at SpotLite on December the 5th. That's a Thursday from 6 to 9. You can go to outliermedia.org to get more information. You can donate at any price point to get in. So we have a suggested donation at whatever you want to give and come. And I hear Norris and Jer are coming to hang out with
and
us.
bring in friends. Bring in
Yeah,
friends.
we
And in
got-
fact,
Oh, and then the bar will be open. It's drinks on us.
Of course.
Food on us.
See?
All
See,
of
so
that.
y'all definitely got to come
Yes.
now. But we definitely wanted to talk about that because, Outlier we view as our cousins, our brothers in arms.
I love that.
In the journalism game. And I love having these types of conversations. And we definitely will be there. And we hope to see some of y'all there at SpotLite for the hustle party, which, by the way, it is a rite of passage. You cannot call yourself a Detroiter unless you know
Yeah,
at least
unless you know
3
at least
hustles.
one or two of them. We're going to have an instructor there, y'all. So
I'm hearing Stevie
time for
Wonder's
that.
"My Eyes Don't Cry" right
That's
now.
right.
Yes,
Let's go, Jer.
yes. See, Jer been here
That's
for a
the
while.
electric slide, baby. Yep. Only Stevie. You can only do the electric slide to Stevie.
100%. Orlando Bailey, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for spending some time
This
with
was
us.
great.
And
I can't believe this is
anytime.
the first time we got to.
let's not let this be the last
Right.
time.
And then we got to get you guys on Authentically Detroit. How about that?
That would be amazing.
That would be fun. Okay.
I want to talk. I've talked to Donna in passing.
Yeah.
And up at different places. I want to it'll be good on air.
It will be fun.
I have so
It
much
will be.
respect for her.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, let's make it happen.
All right, guys.